The conversation we had with Margot as well was great. Do you know Margot?
On Twitter.
Yeah. So she wants to work on a paper looking at ERCOT as a case study, how Bitcoin mining is supporting the transition to renewables, and how it's transitioning to green, and how it's stabilizing the grid. So I think we've got our finance now to go and do that. And the interesting thing about having that paper is it's objective results that you can put in front of people who are spreading the FUD, but it's also a case study that can be taken from state to state to state.
The ERCOT situation is the reason I spend so much time focusing on Texas. Part of the reason I'm in Texas right now is because Texas, the grid is so unique and interesting. So it's an islanded grid, right? Which means it's not connected to the rest of America, which is deliberate because they want the ability to secede if they have to, right? So there's a political reason why the grid is the way it is, which is actually maybe not that prudent, frankly, because you get better stability if you can import and export energy. That would help. But they can't, so they have to be totally self-sufficient. The other thing is they have great wind and solar, so they've been stacking wind and solar like you wouldn't believe. Like you're probably looking at maybe 80 gigawatts of wind and solar additions over the next 3 years here.
What does that mean as a percentage?
That's like 100% of the size of the generation right now in Texas. Wow. Yeah, so it's absolutely unbelievable. But there's enormous problems also. The main problem is that is negatively zero price energy because the energy gets produced and there's nowhere to put it. And so having buyers of that energy ensures that these installations can go up and stay up and monetize maybe even before they're interconnected or before transmission is built out. Having a flexible load, you're going to hear about this a lot. It ensures that the demand side can turn down. They can curtail their usage at a time of grid scarcity. Now, that doesn't solve a problem like the winter storm Uri we had about a year ago here. During that storm, 50 gigawatts of power tripped offline, roughly.
But wasn't that due to the infrastructure just being outdated?
Yeah, it wasn't sufficiently sort of weatherized. Yeah. And Bitcoin wouldn't have fixed that because Bitcoin globally is like maybe 15 gigawatts. So it's not big enough for all the miners to come offline, and it's certainly not 15 gigawatts in Texas. So Bitcoin alone isn't big enough to deal with a failure that large, but for shorter term and smaller scale failures or issues with generation, having a demand side flexibility is very useful. And that's why ERCOT has some of the most sophisticated programs in terms of making insurance products available for miners to sell to the grid effectively. So miners sell these products, which is basically the right for the grid operator to ask them to turn off. And the grid eagerly buys them because they have so much wind and solar, which means that you basically need to buy more insurance because you have less predictability in terms of your generation. And that's a little template that's going to be taken to all the other ISOs. So New York is like learning from Texas right now. Texas is right at the forefront of this stuff. And that's going to be taken to all these other grids that have this higher and higher level of renewable penetration. And Bitcoin miners feature in that because they are the best source of flexible load because they can turn themselves down at short notice. They can stay off indefinitely. No other industrial entity can do that. If you look at other industrial sources of demand response like cement factories or steel mills, they can't stay off indefinitely. They can only stay off for an hour or two at a time. They can't turn down rapidly. They can't turn back online rapidly. So they are, they're doing physical processes because mining is so synthetic. It can turn itself down at a moment's notice. It can turn itself up at a moment's notice. It can be highly controllable. So it's just much more configurable than all these other legacy sources of sort of industrial curtailment. So the Texas case study is the right one to focus on because that is going to be taken out to the rest of the US and then the world at large.